Stepping inside my folks' place one recent afternoon, the last thing I thought I'd catch was the sound of my name being murmured low, almost like a shameful confession. I'd just shown up without calling first, both arms full of bags loaded with groceries, planning to surprise them with a meal they loved for supper, the kind my mom used to whip up when I was a little kid. But as I took a step inside, I froze, hearing their voices floating from the family room. "I honestly don't know how much longer we can keep up this act," my father stated, his tone quieter than usual. "Claire's just a sad failure. She might handle the money, but that doesn't make up for her being a flop in every other aspect." My heart stopped beating. I nearly let the grocery bags fall right then and there. I could make out the gentle jingle of small spoons against mugs as my mother responded, completely calm. "Well, at least her funding keeps us living comfortably. She understands she owes us for everything we've done for her. It's the least she's expected to do." I felt like the air had been punched out of me. I stayed put, gazing at the passage wall, as if it might somehow make sense of why my folks, the very individuals I had worked so incredibly hard to look after, were tearing me to pieces when I wasn't around. Each word felt like a sharp blade, reopening old injuries I believed I had recovered from long ago. I'd always known they weren't the most affectionate parents available. My successes had never seemed sufficient. No move up the career ladder was ever impressive enough. No kind deed generous enough. But this wasn't just critique. This was sheer disdain. I slowly backed out the entry, taking care not to create any noise. The bags were still sitting in my vehicle, completely forgotten. I drove back home in silence, my thoughts buzzing with little bits of their chat. Sad failure. At least her funding keeps us comfortable. Those phrases echoed like cruel, rhythmic chants. I couldn't get them out of my head. For roughly 6 years, I'd been the silent provider, footing the bill for just about every expense. Their house payments, energy costs, even their trips away. After my dad's small workshop failed and my mother quit her job early because of worry, I stepped up to the plate. I was around 28 when I took on the burden, climbing the ladder at a consulting agency, eventually landing a management position, putting in extra hours, living very frugally, so my folks could hang on to the house I grew up in, enjoy meals out often, and never need to fret about expenses. They had no idea how much I gave up. And yet, there they sat in the home I paid for, making fun of me. That evening, I sat on my sofa, staring at the income and expense sheet I updated without fail. Every single dollar spent, every bill covered. I scrolled through the numbers, and for the very first time, I didn't feel a sense of achievement. I felt utterly foolish. I kept playing the whole scene over in my head, wishing I had heard it wrong. Maybe they were discussing somebody else entirely. Maybe it was taken out of context. Maybe it wasn't as awful as it sounded. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had always sensed like their backing was conditional. They only saw worth in me when I was handing them funds. This wasn't a case of misinterpretation. It was the raw truth coming to light. The following morning, I woke up hoping it had just been a terrible dream, but the heavy feeling in my chest told me otherwise. I spent the whole day at work struggling to concentrate, fighting the powerful urge to just drive right back to their residence and demand a full explanation. By the time I got home, I had reached a firm decision. I needed some real answers. I couldn't go another day pretending everything was okay. So I picked up the phone and dialed their number. My father answered on the second ring. "Claire, darling," he said, the usual friendly front in place. I took a shaky inhale. "Dad, I overheard what you two said yesterday," I began, my tone hardly steady. I was standing there. "I heard you both." There was a long, quiet moment on the other end of the line. Then, to my absolute astonishment, my mother grabbed the handset and started to chuckle. Not nervously at all, but genuinely, just as if I had just told some amusing joke. "Well," she said, her voice sharp now, "it's nothing but the truth, isn't it? You've honestly never measured up to what we expected. You are indebted to us for absolutely everything, Claire. You understand that. That did it." At that precise moment, something fundamental inside of me snapped. Years and years of feeling obligated, tied down by duty, and giving blind loyalty simply vanished like sugar dissolving rapidly in hot liquid. I didn't even bother ending the call. I just gently placed the device down on the table and remained sitting there in the quiet. The dwelling felt colder, somehow empty. But for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't painful. It felt liberating. For the first time, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The following couple of days blurred into a haze. I went through the motions mechanically, work duties, necessary tasks, responding to messages, but it felt as though I was observing somebody else living my experiences. The only thing that felt genuinely real was the echo of my mother's laughter and those phrases, "You are indebted to us for absolutely everything." I couldn't manage to sleep. I kept going back over every sacrifice I had made since I was around 28. All the times I'd skipped holidays away, declined invitations from buddies, worked 55-hour weeks without complaint. Also, my folks could live comfortably without the constant dread of losing their dwelling. Every single gift I bought them for celebrations, every meal out I treated them to, every single energy bill quietly taken care of. I hadn't been assisting because I felt forced. I did it completely out of affection. But affection, it turned out, was apparently a route with only one destination. On the third night, I found myself looking through old correspondence and messages, reading conversations with them from the past. It certainly wasn't the very first time they had dismissed my feelings, put me down, or made me feel inadequate. It was just the first time I had truly absorbed what they were saying. My mother's hints disguised as comments about my small move up the ladder at my job. My father's little jests about how at least David would have remained close to help with the family enterprise, even though David, my sibling, hadn't spoken to them in several years. I had been completely oblivious, excusing it all away under the convenient label of, "That's just how they typically behave." But hearing them label me a disappointment without them knowing I was listening stripped away every single false idea. This wasn't just how they typically behaved. This was exactly how they genuinely felt about me. By the weekend, I had arrived at a quiet but unwavering resolution. I was finished. I wasn't going to create a big scene or plead for their affection. I wasn't even going to challenge them ever again. They had clearly shown me exactly who they were at their core, and this time I truly believed them. I opened my personal spending tracking app and canceled every single payment that was automatically linked to their finances. Their house payment, utility accounts, plastic cards, even the cell service plan I had been silently covering since Pop's enterprise collapsed. I stared at the display as the messages confirming the cancellations started arriving. It felt both absolutely terrifying and incredibly freeing at the same moment. For the first time in roughly 6 years, I wasn't functioning as their personal fund dispenser. I was simply me, myself. That evening, I reached out to my best buddy, Sarah. She had always cautioned me that my folks were taking advantage of me, but I had stubbornly defended them regardless. When I explained to her what had transpired, she didn't say, "I knew this would happen." She simply listened attentively, then gently said, "Claire, you're not required to keep providing for individuals who honestly don't even acknowledge you." I cried harder than I had in many years. The very next morning, almost as if the universe could sense the profound change, I received a message from my mother. "Darling, we've noticed several payments aren't going through properly this month. Did you happen to switch financial institutions? Give me a buzz when you have a free moment." Zero hint of an apology. Absolutely no mention of what they had said. Just pure business as usual approach. I did not respond. A couple of hours later, Dad made an attempt. "Hey, Claire, your mom is getting worried now. A few expenses are missing. Can you check things out?" Still not a single apology. Just a clear concern regarding their essential expenses. I let the message notification just sit there unread. The complete lack of response from my end appeared to make them uneasy. Over the following few days, I received numerous additional messages, voice recordings, and even a correspondence via email from my dad, the man who generally despised using computer technology, titled, "Critical, please reply immediately." Each communication grew slightly more frantic in tone. "Claire, we're just so concerned about you. Did you perhaps overlook the house payment? We know you must be very busy with your job. Please don't be so difficult now. We really need to talk things over." I wasn't being difficult. I was simply experiencing freedom. When Sunday came around, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I dedicated the entire day solely to myself. No necessary errands to run. No work-related messages to check. Absolutely no family requirements hanging over me. I went to the local gardens, took along a book I hadn't found any opportunity to read yet, and simply existed fully in the moment. It felt quite strange initially, almost as if I was deliberately overlooking something critically important. But gradually, over time, it began to feel entirely correct and natural. The messages did not cease, however. That evening, as I sat peacefully by the trail watching the sun setting slowly, I received yet another communication from Mom. This time it read, "Contact us when you are able." We honestly didn't mean those things we said. I gazed at those specific phrases for a significant amount of time. We honestly didn't mean those things we said. Did they truly believe this whole situation was merely about a few unfortunate words? That I could somehow erase the memory of them labeling me a failure? That I could completely forget the multitude of years filled with their dismissiveness, their clear sense of entitlement, their affection that came with conditions attached? They hadn't just accidentally let something slip out in the heat of a tense moment. They had articulated those things when they genuinely believed I wasn't within earshot, when they were feeling relaxed, speaking honestly, without any filters in place. I closed my phone down without providing any reply. They meant every single word they uttered. And now, so did I fully mean what I was doing? I fully expected the silence from my end to trigger feelings of deep guilt within me. I fully anticipated enduring restless nights of sleep, experiencing the overwhelming urge to apologize endlessly even when I fully understood I had done absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever. That was the deeply ingrained behavior pattern I had fallen into and repeated for many years. They would apply pressure relentlessly. I would inevitably yield and conform. They would cause me emotional distress, and I would somehow find a way to pardon their actions purely to maintain a sense of fragile peace. But the silence I was now experiencing did not bring any feelings of guilt. It brought a profound sense of relief instead. Days slowly turned into a full week, and still, I maintained my silence, offering no response. I consciously disregarded every incoming message, every missed call, and every single voice recording they left. I observed silently as their overall communication tone shifted noticeably from feigned concern initially to clear irritation, and eventually degenerated into outright desperation. By the time the second week had passed, my mother's messages were sounding increasingly frantic and urgent. "Claire, for the love of everything, why are you simply not answering our calls? Your father and I are experiencing immense worry and distress. We have consistently been good to you throughout your life. Please do not foolishly discard your family connections over one trivial misunderstanding. The house payment is significantly overdue now, and the financial institution is actively reaching out to us. Please, darling child." There it was, laid bare and undeniable. The genuine underlying reason behind their suddenly heightened level of concern. Not my personal welfare or my emotional state, but solely focused on the overdue house payment, their financial stability. Every single time I saw their names pop up with new messages, I could vividly almost hear their voices in my mind as they sat comfortably within the walls of the very dwelling I had personally paid for and maintained, still firmly clinging to the belief that they were inherently entitled to every single thing I had diligently worked hard to build and achieve. Still obstinately pretending that the hurtful things they had articulated meant absolutely nothing at all. Still naively assuming that simply invoking the sacred term family would automatically guarantee them immediate and unconditional forgiveness from me. But I did not experience any feelings of forgiveness towards them. I felt profoundly and utterly betrayed by their actions and words. Sarah graciously extended an invitation for me to come over that Friday evening. She thoughtfully prepared some warm tea, fully aware that I hadn't been able to sleep very much lately. We settled onto her comfortable sofa, surrounded by the soft glow of candles and the gentle sounds of quiet music playing, creating a truly calming atmosphere that stood in stark contrast to the turbulent emotional chaos churning within me. "I genuinely don't even know how to properly articulate it," I confessed openly, cradling the comforting warmth of the mug clutched tightly in both my hands. "It feels exactly like I am actively grieving for them, and yet, paradoxically, they are still very much alive and present." Sarah simply nodded her head slowly, demonstrating complete and immediate understanding of my complex feelings. "You are indeed grieving," she stated gently. You are specifically grieving the idea of the parents you firmly believed you had, or perhaps more accurately, the parents you desperately hoped they might eventually become. I blinked back the welling tears in my eyes. She had articulated the absolute truth. I had honestly spent years and years relentlessly hoping they would undergo some fundamental change. That the very next time I provided them with assistance, the very next time I willingly made a personal sacrifice for their benefit, it would finally, miraculously, be sufficient enough to finally earn their approval and make them genuinely proud of me. But it never truly was enough. And deep down, I knew with painful certainty that it never, ever would be enough for them. They articulated it so effortlessly, Sarah. I whispered softly, the memory sharp and painful, as if it wasn't even the very first time they had thought or spoken those words, as though they had been expressing those sentiments all along in countless moments when I simply wasn't physically present to hear them. You undeniably deserve to be treated far better than that, she declared firmly, her conviction clear. And deep down in your heart, you fully recognize and understand that truth. I did indeed recognize that truth. And the truly peculiar aspect of that realization was that it honestly didn't inflict as much pain as I had initially anticipated it would. Instead, it felt undeniably necessary and even oddly empowering. The subsequent day, I conscientiously checked my incoming electronic mail and discovered one particular message that caused my stomach to involuntarily clench in a knot of apprehension. It was starkly labeled, "Final Notification. Primary residence mortgage payment significantly past due. Immediate and urgent action is required to rectify this situation." I stared intently at the text on the screen, the full weight of the situation landing squarely on my shoulders. For the very first time in what felt like an eternity, my parents were being directly confronted with the unavoidable consequences of their very own choices and actions, and crucially, I was not automatically rushing in like their usual savior to rescue them from the difficult situation they had created. Approximately 1 hour later, another voice recording arrived from my father. His tone of voice was noticeably sharp and cutting now. There was no longer even the slightest pretense of warmth or concern. "Claire, I honestly have no idea whatsoever what the purpose of this petty little maneuver is all about, but you absolutely need to quickly get over whatever ridiculous nonsense you have somehow managed to invent in your mind. Your mother and I are currently experiencing a significant amount of stress and difficulty. You are actively contributing to making things considerably harder and more complicated than they genuinely need to be right now. Simply call us back immediately." I honestly couldn't suppress a short, humorless laugh at his sheer audacity. After absolutely everything that had transpired, he genuinely believed that I was the primary source of their stress and difficulty. Later that same evening, my mother placed a call once again. This time around, she didn't even bother making the slightest effort to conceal her rising level of obvious frustration and irritation. "We honestly raised you to behave far better than this current display," she snapped sharply into the phone, her voice tight with anger, "simply ignoring us completely, deliberately allowing the house payment to lapse into this state. We genuinely did not mean what we said earlier. You are fully aware of how your father tends to become when he is feeling particularly frustrated and upset." And she added, "And I was clearly just making a harmless joke at the time. Stop being so unbelievably sensitive about everything and just call us back immediately." Sensitive. The particular word struck me with considerably more impact than I had initially expected it would. They had consistently and effectively used that single word as a convenient weapon to casually dismiss and invalidate my feelings throughout my entire life. Every instance of emotional hurt I experienced, every single boundary I attempted to establish firmly, was immediately and conveniently labeled by them as me simply being overly sensitive and dramatic. But I wasn't genuinely being sensitive anymore. I was definitively and irrevocably finished with their manipulations and behaviors. I consciously closed my eyes for a moment and vividly pictured them sitting together in their family room, undoubtedly panicking frantically as they received increasingly insistent phone calls directly from the financial institution. I could almost distinctly hear my father immediately placing blame onto my mother, and simultaneously hear my mother immediately placing blame squarely onto me, both of them far too stubbornly proud to openly acknowledge the undeniable, painful truth that without my consistent and substantial financial support, They were simply incapable of affording the comfortable lifestyle they had diligently constructed and grown accustomed to. And surprisingly, I was now perfectly okay with that stark reality. That specific night, for the first time in what felt like a very long duration, I finally slept soundly and peacefully. On the following Sunday morning, Sarah and I went out for a leisurely mid-morning meal. As we sat comfortably on the outdoor terrace of the cafe, observing people casually walking past, my personal communication device vibrated unexpectedly once more. Another incoming message had arrived from my mother. "Claire, we genuinely did not mean any of those hurtful things we said. Please, we are begging you. Just call us back right away. We desperately need you in our lives." But this particular message contained something subtly different this time around. It wasn't solely filled with raw desperation. It was also laced with undeniable fear. And somehow, that particular emotion did not bother me in the slightest. In a strange way, it almost felt like a fitting and overdue sense of balance being restored. Sarah noticed me intently staring down at my phone screen. "Are you planning to respond to them at all?" she inquired softly. I slowly shook my head in response. "Not at this precise moment," I replied quietly. Because deep down in my gut, I fully understood that this situation was merely the initial phase of something much larger and more complex. As the second month drew to a close, the prolonged silence I had purposefully created was no longer a source of underlying anxiety or fear for me. It had transformed into something I actively embraced and fully owned. My parents, conversely, were visibly starting to unravel emotionally and practically. I could clearly discern their escalating distress in the increasing frequency of their persistent calls, the progressively more panicked and rambling voice recordings they left, and the steady accumulation of passive-aggressive electronic messages that piled up in my inbox like unwanted junk mail I had never solicited. They simply could not genuinely comprehend why I wasn't immediately rushing back into their lives to rescue them from their predicament, just as I had reliably done for them in the past. Why wasn't their traditionally compliant and dutiful offspring stepping up without hesitation to mend the obvious fractures and deep cracks in their foundation that they had deliberately pretended didn't exist for such a significant period of time? They were simply not accustomed to encountering this newly emerged version of me, the version of their child that resolutely refused to simply bend and conform to their expectations any longer. Sarah observed this notable shift in my demeanor as well. "You honestly appear much lighter now," she remarked one evening as we strolled together through the park, the dry leaves crunching softly beneath our feet with each step. "As though you are finally able to freely breathe and live your own life." "I truly am," I admitted candidly. "For the very first time in my entire existence, I don't feel any sense of obligation or indebtedness to a single soul." Nevertheless, a small part of me still couldn't help but wonder exactly when the truly acute panic would finally commence for them. The house payment wasn't just casually overdue at this point. It was now genuinely on the perilous edge of officially entering foreclosure proceedings. The financial institution had most likely already initiated the formal legal process, and knowing my parents' typical avoidance behavior, they had almost certainly been deliberately ignoring all incoming calls and correspondence from the bank until it became absolutely and utterly unavoidable to do so any longer. That unavoidable moment of impossibility arrived with brutal clarity the very next day. My phone unexpectedly rang loudly while I was actively engaged at my workplace. I consciously chose to disregard it, just as I had consistently ignored every single incoming call from them recently. But when I later accessed and listened to the recorded voice message, my father's voice sounded profoundly different and distinctly strained. It was tight with barely suppressed fear and naked desperation. "Claire, I am pleading with you now, please. It's regarding the bank situation. We are genuinely losing the house itself. They have officially commenced the formal foreclosure proceedings against us. We genuinely did not mean any of those things we said before. We were simply feeling very upset and distressed in that moment. It honestly wasn't truly about you at all. Please just call us back as quickly as you possibly can." I simply stared blankly at the screen of my phone, completely unmoved and unaffected by his plea. It was undeniably about me. It had fundamentally and consistently been about me all along, about their deep-seated disappointment that I ultimately did not grow up to become the precise person they had envisioned and desperately wanted me to be, about their deeply ingrained sense of entitlement to readily claim and utilize absolutely everything I had diligently and tirelessly worked so incredibly hard to achieve and accumulate. The undeniable fact that they were only finally reaching out to me now, only when they were facing the immediate and critical threat of financially drowning, honestly told me absolutely everything I needed to conclusively understand about their true motivations and feelings. Later that particular night, as I was casually scrolling through various social media feeds without any specific purpose, I received yet another incoming message. This time, however, it originated from a number that was completely unknown and unrecognizable to me. The short text message simply read, "Hey there, it's your mother's sister, Aunt Betty. Your mother is experiencing a complete emotional collapse right now, Claire. Please, just call her back urgently. Her. Folks stick together." I gritted my teeth. Folks stick together. That saying had been used against me my entire life, like a weapon. But I finally saw that being family didn't mean letting bad behavior continue. It didn't mean crushing yourself so others could thrive while labeling you a failure. I said nothing back. A few days went by. More kin started reaching out. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had ideas about forgiving and forgetting. Each one pleaded their case, but none of them really understood what had happened. They hadn't heard the terrible things said to me. They hadn't sat alone in their living room, hearing their parents call them nothing more than a money source with feelings. When I didn't reply, the push for guilt turned into veiled threats. It began small. My dad emailed me a news piece about how hard it was for people over 55 to find affordable housing nearby, with a note that read, "Is this really what you want for your parents?" Then my mom went further. "If you don't help us, everyone will find out. Your friends, your boss. Do you want them to know how selfish you are after all we sacrificed?" A shiver went down my back. I hadn't expected them to go there, to threaten my reputation at work. And yet, deep down, I wasn't shocked. This was the real them. When the pretense finally dropped, I forwarded the email to Maria without adding anything. She called me right away. "Sarah, you have to look out for yourself. Don't let them twist this around." "I won't," I replied, my voice steady. "Not this time." I logged into my work system and started collecting important papers. Pay records, emails, even job performance reviews. I wasn't foolish. If they'd spread lies to family, they might try to reach further. I wasn't going to let them. Before the week was over, another message arrived from my mom, sounding less like a threat and more like a begging. "We didn't mean it, Sarah. We were stressed out. It was just a difficult day. Please don't let this destroy everything. You're our daughter. You're supposed to be there for us." But their words didn't affect me anymore. The damage was already done. Not just from what they said that one day, but from every small insult, every time they expected me to pay for their life, every guilt trip, and every moment I'd spent thinking I was the issue. They could frame it however they wanted now. But the simple truth was, I wasn't their safety net anymore. And whether they wanted to face it or not, they were about to fall. The complete collapse happened faster than I anticipated. A week after their last desperate message, I got a call from Aunt Betty again. This time she sounded panicked. "Sarah, they're losing their place. They only have a few weeks left before it goes to auction. Your dad is beside himself and your mom. She's crying nonstop. Please, you have to step in now." I listened quietly, staring up at the ceiling as I lay on my sofa. The person I was just months ago would have been pacing the room, heart pounding, frantically trying to find a way to rescue them. But now I felt distant. Sad, yes, but also completely certain. I had already intervened. For years, I had saved them from this exact situation more times than I could count. But instead of being thankful, they treated me with disrespect. "Aunt Betty," I said carefully, "I'm sorry, but I won't be getting involved." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp gasp of breath. "Sarah, they're still your mother and father. They made mistakes, of course, but family is family, always." "I know," I replied. "And that's exactly why I gave them far more than I ever should have. But I can't keep sacrificing myself for people who only show me affection when it's convenient for them." Before she could say more, I ended the call. I wasn't prepared to listen to the same old tune of, "But they're family again." I had heard that record play too many times. Over the next few days, the situation worsened. I started receiving emails directly from the bank, probably because I was still listed as a prior emergency contact. The house was formally in the foreclosure process. Notices had been posted on the property. I pictured my parents being shocked to see the familiar red paper pinned to their front door. A small part of me felt bad, but guilt had been my normal state for too long. Instead, I remembered the countless times I'd pulled them back from the brink, only to be repaid with insults behind my back. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had revealed who they truly were. Then came the message that made my stomach turn. "Sarah," my dad wrote in a cold, sharp email, "if you don't fix this immediately, you will regret it greatly. You are indebted to us. We are your parents, and you have no right to abandon us like this. Recall who paid for your schooling. Recall who brought you up." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer nerve they had. They did not pay for my schooling. I did. I'd worked a couple of jobs, taken out student loans, and when my parents' checks bounced during my sophomore year of university, I covered the difference myself. I had never even asked them to pay me back. I scrolled through my saved emails and found the payment confirmations, proof of every single cent I had scraped together to stay in school. I sat there in stunned silence, realizing just how completely they had rewritten the past to fit their story. They never supported me financially. They never truly stood by me. The very next day, the ultimate breaking point arrived. A voice message left by my mother, her voice wavering between crying and anger. "I sincerely hope you are happy, Sarah. We are about to lose everything. The house, the vehicles, it's all falling apart completely. Is this genuinely what you wanted? For your own parents to end up with nothing? You are utterly pathetic. Just as we always told you." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were so typical. This wasn't a new kind of behavior. This was simply the first time I wasn't numbing myself enough to ignore it completely. They weren't sorry for the mean things they had said. They were just sorry about the unpleasant results. I played the voice message for Maria that evening, silent tears streaming down my face. "You absolutely don't deserve this treatment," she whispered quietly. "This isn't genuine love, Sarah. This is simply cruel manipulation." I nodded my head in agreement. I knew she was absolutely right, and as painful as it was to face, the final piece of my decision finally settled into place inside me. I absolutely would not be their rescuer. I wasn't simply pulling back my financial support. I was completely finished being their convenient scapegoat. 2 days following that, another electronic message came, very short and full of panic. "Please, Sarah, we absolutely didn't mean any of it. Just help us out this very last time. We are truly begging you now." I looked at the message on the screen for a very long time indeed, but I chose not to send any reply at all. Instead, I quietly started getting things ready for something I really should have done a very long time ago, actively defending myself both legally and emotionally in a serious way. Because whether they fully realized it or not in their panic, their dependable safety net was officially and completely gone forever, and this specific time they were definitely going to hit the hard ground with a serious impact. The specific day the house officially went into the formal foreclosure process, there was no big fanfare, no loud dramatic confrontation, and certainly no deeply heartfelt apology from anyone. Just a cold, impersonal electronic notification email directly from the bank, clearly stating the now completely unavoidable outcome. The actual property would be publicly auctioned off within approximately 30 days, unless the entire outstanding balance was fully paid immediately. I knew perfectly well they could not possibly afford to pay it without receiving a large sum of money directly from me. They were suddenly completely exposed to the cold, hard reality of the situation, the exact harsh reality I had been carefully shielding them from for many years of my life. I honestly thought I might experience some kind of deep satisfaction observing everything completely fall apart around them. But the honest truth was, it wasn't satisfying in the slightest way. It was simply very quiet. A profound sense of quietness I hadn't genuinely experienced since I was a very young child. For this one singular time, I wasn't frantically rushing around trying desperately to solve someone else's very serious problems for them. Just a few days later, Maria and I decided to go out for some coffee together at a local cafe. She gently slid a simple manila folder, directly across the small table towards me. "I finally spoke to a qualified lawyer, exactly like you specifically asked me to do," she clearly stated. "Absolutely everything is completely prepared and fully ready now. If they try anything at all, like trying to smear your professional name, showing up unexpectedly at your place of employment, or attempting to harass you repeatedly, you're now fully covered and legally protected." I simply nodded my head slowly in acknowledgement, quietly staring down at the folder resting on the table without making any move to open it up. The distinct heaviness in my chest region was undeniably still present inside me, but it honestly felt very different now somehow. It was no longer the crippling weight of crushing fear or overwhelming guilt taking up space. It was simply the steady, certain weight of intentionally moving forward with my life away from this situation. "They are actually going to completely lose their house." I finally managed to say the words out loud in a low voice. Maria didn't visibly flinch or react strongly at all. "They ultimately chose this specific path themselves," she stated calmly. And very deep down inside myself, I knew with complete certainty that her simple statement was absolutely the undeniable truth of the entire situation. The very next phone call came the following weekend directly to my phone. This particular time, it was clearly my father calling, and his familiar voice sounded almost completely unrecognizable to my ears, cracked and clearly broken. Absolutely nothing at all like the intimidating figure of authority I had somehow grown up constantly interacting with. Sarah, please don't actually do this to us. We honestly didn't fully mean any of it. You know, deep down inside, we genuinely didn't mean any of it. We were incredibly upset and extremely stressed out beyond belief. But we genuinely need you right now. We desperately need you in our lives." For just a very brief second or two, I almost instinctively answered the incoming call on my phone. The small part of me that still foolishly craved their ultimate approval of me, the lingering inner child inside me who just desperately wanted her mother and father to finally genuinely love her exactly the way she had always intensely wished for throughout her entire life, almost actually picked up that ringing phone immediately. But I ultimately did not, because I finally and completely understood the true reality of the situation with total clarity. They hadn't actually reached out to sincerely apologize to me after intentionally hurting me so deeply. They had only chosen to reach out at this precise moment because the steady flow of much-needed money had abruptly and completely stopped flowing to them. They didn't genuinely need me as their daughter. They only truly needed what I consistently gave them financially. I spent the entire rest of that long day carefully boxing up many old family photo albums, handwritten cards, small trinkets, and other random things I had mindlessly kept hold of for years out of some misplaced sense of unwavering loyalty to them. But as I deliberately placed each item into a growing donation pile near my front door, I had a sudden, powerful realization. All these previous years, I had foolishly believed that completely cutting all emotional ties with them would leave me feeling deeply empty inside my heart and soul. Instead, I honestly felt significantly lighter with the sealing of every single box I finished packing away. Approximately 4 weeks later, the house was officially listed for public auction online. Word of the impending auction spread extremely fast among our extended family members. Relatives I had not heard from or spoken to in what felt like many years suddenly flooded my phone with countless demanding messages and unanswered calls. How could you possibly deliberately abandon your own parents like this after everything? They genuinely sacrificed so very much for you when you were younger. This specific action is simply completely unforgivable in every way. Each individual message attempted forcefully to pull me back into the specific familiar role I had almost always played for them throughout my life. The dedicated peacemaker, the immediate fixer of all their problems, the obedient daughter who dutifully took constant care of absolutely everyone else around her except herself. But I simply did not flinch or give in at all. Absolutely not this particular time in my life. The true turning point in the situation came when my mother herself unexpectedly showed up directly at my physical office building downtown one afternoon. I carefully watched her every move from the absolute safety and anonymity of the building's security cameras located in the lobby area as she desperately pleaded with the kind receptionist to be immediately allowed to come upstairs to see me directly. When the building security team politely escorted her back outside the main doors, she looked around frantically on the street, as if she were desperately searching for someone, anyone at all, who could magically make this entire awful situation immediately stop happening. It definitely was not me she was searching for or waiting on anymore. Later that same afternoon, I discovered a simple handwritten note taped carefully to the windshield wiper blade of my car parked in the employee lot. "Please, Sarah, we can absolutely fix this terrible misunderstanding. Please, just don't actually do this specific awful thing to your own family members now." I carefully folded up the small note without emotion and calmly threw it directly into a nearby trash receptacle. On the very night before the scheduled public auction was set to happen, I quietly sat alone on the floor of my quiet apartment living room, slowly sipping a calming cup of tea, simply staring peacefully at the thousands of twinkling city lights visible beyond my large window. I did not feel any sense of victory or triumph at all. I did not feel particularly cruel either. I simply felt profoundly free and completely unburdened for the very first time in my adult life. Maria called my phone. "They are honestly still desperately trying to reach out and contact you," she stated gently through the phone line. "Are you truly feeling okay right now?" "I truly am feeling okay now," I calmly replied back. And for the very first time in my entire existence, I genuinely and completely meant those exact words with every fiber of my being. The house successfully sold the very next morning at the scheduled auction to a genuinely happy-looking young couple who looked absolutely ecstatic as they proudly held the brand new keys in their hands. I watched the official announcement happen online later that day, knowing deep down inside that this particular painful chapter of my life had finally been permanently closed forever. My parents eventually moved into a much smaller rental apartment located on the opposite side of town from where they used to live. I honestly did not know any of the specific details surrounding their move. I consciously did not even ask a single question about it. I only knew the very little bit I happened to hear indirectly through other people who knew them, and I truly did not feel any need whatsoever to know any more information than that because this entire situation was genuinely not about seeking revenge against them. It was finally and wholeheartedly about finally choosing myself and my own well-being above everything else for the very first time. Approximately 4 months later, standing alone inside my own quiet apartment, completely surrounded by my own carefully chosen furniture, enveloped in my own hard-won personal peace, and living strictly by my own carefully established rules for my life, I had a very profound realization. I hadn't tragically lost my family members as I had always feared I would. They had, in fact, completely and irrevocably lost me instead. And surprisingly enough to me, that specific profound realization was undeniably the single most personally empowering and freeing thing I had ever genuinely experienced or done in my entire life's journey up to that point. Sometimes, making the difficult decision to simply walk completely away from something isn't primarily about administering a harsh punishment to someone. It is fundamentally and entirely about ensuring your own personal survival and well-being in a challenging situation. And I had undoubtedly survived everything they had thrown at me and come out the other side stronger and freer than ever before.